So we'll get started. I want to start by recognizing the land on which we meet has been here from time immemorial. People have inhabited southern Ontario for about 10,000 years, and we acknowledge the neutral people, also called the Anawanaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people who lived here when settlers arrived and who share this land with us. May we together learn to care for and respect each other, our flora, fauna, and the land we inhabit together. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? All right, we need a motion for the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Anybody want to move? Sebastian and Eric, thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried, thank you. Tonight we do have one delegation from Schlegel Urban Development. We have Steve Harris and Vaughn Bender here to talk to us about the development application they have for Elmira. So you can, we don't have any microphones today, so you can just stand up and talk when you're ready. You will have 7 minutes, and I believe Alex will be controlling that. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Cadeau and members of the committee. My name is Vaughn Bender with Schlegel Urban Developments. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. We are a local family-owned development company involved in seniors care, involved in residential and mixed-use development projects, including the St. Jacobs Farmers Market and Stockyards restaurant site here in Woolwich Township, and other projects, seniors care projects in southwestern Ontario. You might be asking why we're here tonight. We were in attendance at an unrelated meeting, July 22nd, unrelated application of ours, and a question was asked around the council chamber as to whether the applicant on another application had presented to the track committee in relative proximity to our lands. So we thought, just out of an abundance of communication and so on, we would request to come before the committee tonight and just update on what we're doing and the land that we're working on. And of course, joined by Steve from GHD, who's been doing our environmental and hydrogeology work. So I will let Steve take it from there, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Vaughn. Hello, everyone. Flip my next slide. Slide number 1, Vaughn is pretty much covered an introduction of Schlegel and GHD, me being from GHD, and an entire team has been looking at Schlegel development property from the perspective of environmental concerns as well as hydrogeology. So the purpose of the presentation is, as Vaughn mentioned, to ensure that TRAC is aware of the proposed development and to give you an outline of some of the steps we followed to get to the point we are in the application. So the efforts completed to this point have been done in consultation with the region of Waterloo. We've completed a phase 1, phase 2 ESA for the development property, which were peer reviewed under the direction of the region and determined to be consistent with the Area Regulation 15304, which is the record of site condition regulation. We submitted an affidavit to the region stating that the regional groundwater plume beneath Elmira poses no public health or safety risk for the proposed development. As I get into the study of our phase 2 ESA, I'll describe how the regional groundwater plume came into play with respect to the phase 2 ESA. Township of Woolwich is to amend their zoning bylaw to prohibit the installation of private wells, which will prevent exposure to that regional groundwater plume. And we have established with Schlegel a mechanism for monitoring NDMA within the regional groundwater plume for a 5-year period, which was a specific request of the region. The region or township is to provide a waiver for a record of site condition for the property. The development property doesn't need a record of site condition under Ontario Regulation 153 because it's development of agricultural to residential, so it's not going to a more sensitive land use. This is just a site map of the developed property. We're located down in the south end of Elmira, on the corner of Listowel Road rather, and Arthur Street. And we have a number of mixed residential and low density, high density, low density residential proposed on the property. Development progress to date. We've completed our pre-consultation meeting in January of 2023. That's the first pre-consultation meeting. Second one occurred December 10th of 2024. We submitted our application in June 19th of 2025. Application deemed complete in July 31st of this year, and we had our statutory public meeting held on the 23rd of September. That's the schedule of our progress in our application to date. I mentioned that we conducted phase 1 and phase 2 ESAs in support of the development. This gives basic, really high level look at the investigations that we completed. The phase 1 ESA did identify potential environmental concerns, areas of potential environmental concerns, or apex. On site, there was a few soil stockpiles. There were some chicken barns with that recently been dismantled, and there was some fertilizer storage on the site, all prompting investigation under Regulation 153.044. There were also a couple of off-site concerns that were identified. One being the directional drilling and garage in the central portion coming off of Arthur Road, and then up in the very northeast corner, former Apple Auto Class. So our investigations on the property were focused on those, superficial soil sampling, groundwater sampling in the upper aquifer, and another APEC we identified, of course, was a regional groundwater plume. And we did install some municipal aquifer wells up in the upper northeast corner, MU1 and MO1. We knew CH72 A and B were prior existing monitoring wells. We had prior sampling results that showed that the plume was somewhere between the location of CH72 and in the northeast corner on our property. Hydrogeologic conditions that we found on the site are very consistent with the regional hydrogeologic conditions throughout Elmira. We encountered the SAT, or the upper superficial aquitard, overlying the upper aquifer, the UA. We found the UAT, the upper aquitard, and we found the municipal aquifer, the upper portion and the lower portion, the MU and the ML. We installed our 2 monitoring wells in the MU and ML, ML1 and ML2 up in the far right-hand side of that corner, right up in the upper northeast corner of the property. After completing our phase 2, we found no contaminants of concern on the property in soil or groundwater, with the exception of detecting low levels of MDMA at our MU1 location. ML1 location, MDMA was below the Ontario Drinking Water Standards, and we detected nothing at CH72 above standards. As you know, the MU and ML is deep on the development property and is overlaid by clean groundwater in the UA. So there's no exposure to the regional groundwater plume or the proposed development. As I mentioned earlier, bylaw on prohibiting private wells will be extended to the property. And then based on the phase 1, phase 2 ESA results, GHD submitted an affidavit to the region stating that the regional groundwater plume posed no public health or safety risk to the proposed residential development, simply because there's no exposure to it. So Schlegel and GHD have entered into an access agreement to allow us to sample the MU monitoring well on our property as part of the regional groundwater plume monitoring that we do in collaboration with plants. Latest annual sampling event was completed in October. And that is the end of our presentation.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking your time to come in proactively and just advise the committee of what's going on. More generally, thank you to Schlegel Developments for everything you do in the community. Any questions from the committee? Sebastian?
The plumes have receded. I'm surprised that you're still finding anything in ML1. What levels were they?
Just marginally above.
Just marginally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they are receding, so we trended downward in that score. So there should be no problem at all.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with the track here, but how many people are expected to be living on this development site? What are your expectations in terms of numbers?
And we anticipate, 350 to 450 units, so
Okay.
2.75 on average per home. So like that, so
Right.
1,000, 1,200. Yeah.
Has there been any issue about water supply?
There has not been any, prior indication of any concern about water supply. We're well aware of the, announcement that's been made by the region of Waterloo and the current, pause and so on, so.
Yeah.
I think, like everyone, we're waiting to hear more about that, but, yeah.
That has nothing to do with track.
No, I appreciate that.
Just a curious.
Yeah.
Statement or question from a concerned citizen.
Yeah.
The water supply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Sebastian. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, John.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, so item 5, we have the offsite contamination cleanup progress and risk updates from Lanxess.
All right. I'll go ahead and let her Alex get the slides up too, thanks. Cause I don't know what I'm saying otherwise.
Just so we're aware, you're probably kind of presenting on 5.1, 5.3 all at once.
And so I think for the introduction, I'm not gonna go through my agenda, I'm sure you all looked at it. Okay, so there's the agenda, we have a lot to cover, but I think it'll go pretty quickly. So just a year in review. Again, I'm guessing a lot of you may have already looked at this, these are the deliverables we've worked on. The updated conceptual site model that Jesse presented, our audit report, which is more affiliated with the plant. Our annual monitoring report that is what Joe Ricker kind of gives a highlight recap on that we did earlier in the year. And then we've completed the municipal aquifer test, and Cullen will talk more about that in detail. We're starting the bench scale study, we'll talk about that as well. And also as the last meeting in September, as Integral presented on where we are with the Canagajig Creek. We're working on a data summary report for the ministry. So those are kind of some of the high levels. Any questions on the slide? Okay.
If I can, I know Tiffany, last year you had indicated want to see like things in different pots, as it were. I think that was the term you used.
Yeah.
So we tried to reorganize the presentation in that manner this year.
That's great. Yeah.
Just wanted to.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties. Yeah, so these are the pots, right? I'll let you talk about the pots.
So this is, I know a lot of you've seen this slide before. This is just a very detailed, not detailed, but high level summary of everything that's done just to keep the extraction system and treatment system up and running. A lot of it is normal and usual and has been presented before. Everything from just inspecting instruments to preventative maintenance on relief valves and devices and calibration. All of that's in here. There were a couple of additional pieces of work that were done. This year, the UA tower required some maintenance. And there was some additional work done with the ammonia treatment system as well, which weren't foreseen, but were completed just to keep the system in service and ready to go, not just this year, but for many more years to come. I don't want to go into each item. I can if anyone has any questions, but these are all just the little things that Lanxess does just to keep the system up and running and monitored.
And all the sampling too.
Yeah, the sampling's in there too, because we need to know where we're at in terms of influent levels, effluent levels to make necessary adjustments, bringing lamps on, adjusting flows, all of that kind of feeds into the day-to-day operation of the system that Lanxess looks at and evaluates. Go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah, the CTA system is almost 30 years old. It's getting to its, probably its end of life. Is there concern or about something breaking down in the near future, or have plans been put in place where we're going to be able to see the CTS system get to the next level of its life stage?
So a few years back, Sebastian Ramin recognized that was a reality that was coming. And additional monies have been put in place to update and upgrade various aspects of the CTS. Essentially all pumps have been replaced now, so there's not an original pump in the system. Tanks are inspected on it's either I think it's every 5 years. They're emptied and inspected. Instruments are constantly undergoing calibration certification. Valves have been replaced. We've looked at the force mains as well and evaluated the efficiency and plugging of those. And yes, everything has been done to ensure not only that the system works today, but for the next 25 years.
But you have a good point too. So we know, I think you all know I'm trying to understand the site and understand. Are there enhancements? Are there different things that we can do? Are there different pumping regimes that might help us clean it up quicker? And I anticipate pumping may look different once we work through the new control order. So my focus is, I mean, we have some equipment that is, obsolete. It's not obsolete yet, but it was the highest top of class when they purchased it, but that was in the 90s and it's not anymore. So as we start to change that, we'll be looking at the newer equipment. So when you did the tour, it was with that Trojan system and where the ATS, the ammonia treatment system is in that building. That's the newer work and equipment and the workhorse, and it can do more. So we'll move towards using it and then retiring some of the more obsolete type material. So there's a plan because there's so many treatment trains. You know, if you kind of looked at it, there are about 3 that are redundant working in unison.
Yeah. What about the pipes themselves?
Just to add on the Rayox systems, because that's, I think, what Patty was referring to.
Yeah, sorry.
Program logic controls have been rebuilt not once, but twice by Lanxess. So the actual internal computer and components have been upgraded 2 times over the life of those systems. Again, Ramin undertook a further upgrade to give it another, 10, 15 years with newer equipment. So the internal controls are all new. Lanxess has the ability themselves to rebuild wiper systems to maintain lamps on those. So it's Lanxess has the in-house expertise to keep those systems running for the foreseeable future, Sebastian. And I'm sorry, you were.
No, that's
kind of
okay. The pipes, so
Yeah.
the distribution lines.
Yeah, so, we've looked at, we constantly look at the pressures in the lines. We have had the ability to, when we did the work in 2015, to cut into some of the lines and evaluate buildup. And again, everything looks great, Sebastian. Everything is not presenting issues at this stage in the lifespan of the system. And the HDP lines themselves are very robust. They can handle up to, I believe, the burst rating on them are quite high. They're plastic, they will not rupture. The diameters are such that, again, we've got a lot of capacity in the system. We have a redundancy as well, Sebastian, in that we can divert flows it's a parallel 2-stage line in the ground. So we can switch flows from one line to the other. So we have that built-in contingency and backup as well.
Yes, sir. The reason why I mentioned it is that some of my copper pipes have, they plugged up over the years.
These are good questions. Lexus has built-in redundancies in a lot of aspects of the system. And again, it's not been a situation where we're just putting a Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. I mean, rebuilding a PLC system for a 1990s piece of equipment is a big undertaking. And we've done that twice. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, good questions.
Roughly how many gallons a day or week are we taking out of the aquifer?
It's about 1 million gallons a day that we're taking out and going to the creek. Yeah, it's a big number.
Anything else?
I have one question about the last bullet there. I know that the groundwater extraction target rates have been a point of contention with some people. Can you speak to that?
I think we're just we're looking at, so we've had new wells come online. Nathan, we've had PW6 come online, so we had to develop a target for that. We've also gone through and looked at on-site, the guiding principle is containment of groundwater, making sure that groundwater on site doesn't leave the site. And in the past, the targets were set such that, like, if you did a pump test on a well and it could do, let's just throw out a number, 120 gallons a minute, you set your target at 100. And that was like, you know, you'd give yourself a 20% contingency in terms of what you could do.
It's like me when I'm playing hockey.
Yeah, and really, it's a little more complicated than that, because in a lot of cases, we are perhaps maybe over pumping, and maybe taking too much water, and maybe more water than we need to. So I think we want to just be cognizant of that, be cognizant of that this is a resource, and maybe we don't need to pump as hard to achieve the
Well,
objective.
but also that we may be over pumping so that we're missing some of the mass too.
Yeah.
So that's where we're looking at all the data. So I think Cullen, if your question's maybe not answered after Cullen presents, it might have to, we can revisit it. It's just looking at everything right now.
Since we're talking about pumping and since we have the announcement where the regions got some concerns in Manheim, part of the concerns is that the aquifer is a lot lower than they anticipated. So how are we making sure that, I mean, the first objective obviously is to pull the mass out, but how are we balancing that? Or are we?
Is it the same aquifer?
I mean, I guess
Well,
regionally.
it's
it would-
different from that aquifer. I
Yeah,
know.
it would
I know
be
it's not the same.
it's described as a unconfined like aquifer. I'm not sure if it's the specific same unit that they're pulling out of Manheim. We do monitor water levels throughout the entire aquifer within Elmira. Obviously, you know, the goal has been in the past, the stated goal of 2028 remediation. Obviously, we all know really where that we can't achieve that everywhere and in all places, and that's not going to happen. So I think that last bullet maybe speaks to that as well. Like, what are we gonna do? Maybe there's, for instance, at E7, we realized we could get more NDMA out of the well by pulsing it, by running it on an on and off cycle, letting the aquifer relax, letting contaminants dissolve back into phase. And we actually got more NDMA out of doing it that way than out of running it constantly. So these are the things that I think Alexis is going to further explore. And I know Colin, I don't want to steal his thunder, is going to touch on this later on.
But the other important point is the region, as I think you all know, they have the well up on Scotch Line Road E10. And they said they would put that into their distribution line right away if they could. So we have reached out to them and we want to do a study where they can do a pumping test on that well. And we can instrument our wells with data loggers that will talk about the drawdown and how the wells are reacting when they pump that for a day to see what's happening there. Because we want to try to help support getting that back on board so it can go into the drinking water system. And we continue to just try to get their attention to see if we can make that happen. Cause that's an important data point for us.
That was sort of where I was going with the question too, to make sure that. You know, I mean, we've always said at some point we may need to use that water and, you know, this is maybe a wake up call that we, you know, might need it sooner than later. And if we do, how do we make sure that we're not depleting the aquifer completely?
Do we know if there has been any in the past? Like, has it gone down since 1991?
The
The
level of
aquifer
water, I
level?
don't know.
It fluctuates over time with more so precipitation events, obviously. You know, when you have dry years, we see the levels go down. When we have wetter years, we see the levels come up. So we've seen anywhere from 2 to 3 meter change in the actual levels over time from one year to the next. There hasn't been, I don't believe there's an overall trend at this stage, like down or up. It's just kind of bouncing up and down over I get an average or a mean.
But no significant change
No.
from the pumping rate,
Mm.
from pumping the water or removing it. So
No, not that we've observed. Again, but again, our stated goal is not, is remediation, right?
Right.
It's cleanup, so. So that, in that light, we were always trying to maximize the amount of water and contaminants we could get out.
And when I read those articles, I wonder if it said the reservoir had less capacity than they expected. I'll have to go back and look at it, meaning maybe. And that could be directly to rainfall. I don't know. I know I'm trying to tease out what they said, yeah.
When I looked at that, I believe they're having issues with some reservoirs, and maintenance on reservoirs. And then they have an additional issue at Greenbrook, which is the biggest, I think, water treatment plant in the region, so. My understanding, I'm just reading from the articles like
Right.
everyone else, that it's an issue that they can resolve in the short term, but in the long term, I know Sebastian's talked about this. I mean, it's something that they have to address and plan for in the future, for sure.
I think Eric had his hand up, so maybe he can add to the discussion.
Yeah, I can't really comment on what is happening in the region. I don't know. But I will comment back to progress reports as early as in this summer, which were documenting noticeably lower water levels in the municipal upper and lower aquifer in response to decreased precipitation. So there is a climate change or a seasonal decrease in the amount of water around that would affect capacity potentially in these extraction wells. The difference between what's going on here and as Louis mentioned is their wells are designed to maximize drawdown in an area and provide containment. The region operates wells to get as much water as you can. They're very different. So pumping wells for a designed purpose, you might not see the overall change in climate driven lower precipitation levels affecting the ability to get the extraction rates out that you're currently trying to pump. They might not be related because you're not pumping as much water out, that capacity would be limited by a change in precipitation.
Yeah, I agree, Eric. We have different goals, objectives for sure, yeah. And we operate differently.
Excellent. Next slide.
Next slide is again, just a little bit of more of the same, all the things that we're planning to do next year. Again, just everything we need to do to ensure that the system operates in accordance with the environmental compliance approval and the control order. And as Sebastian pointed out, just again, making sure that we're not able to operate for next year, but for many more years to come. Obviously, we are thinking about and looking at changes and maybe doing things differently, but right now the goal is to keep the system up and operational for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, any questions on planned work? All right, we'll let Cullen go ahead and speak. Cullen, do you mind introducing yourself? I know some in the room have met you, but not everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Hadley. So my name's Colin Flanders. I'm from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. Sorry I couldn't be at the meeting today. I had a previously scheduled conflict. My background, I'm an environmental engineer. I'm a remediation expert. I often come in and help optimize existing treatment systems that have been running for numbers of years and look for ways to improve them. So it's kind of my background. I used to be with GHD. Now I am currently with Montrose Environmental. So I'm still serving the same role, just different company now. Yeah. So Hallie, thanks for showing the slide. The bench scale, we're into the early stages of the study. It's just reminding, we collected water from 4 different extraction wells. The data on the right there, the table is, kind of the baseline just to see what we had in the water that we collected. We're presenting that data, no surprises in the data, nothing looks unusual, and everything made sense, matched historical numbers. GHD is currently, in the middle of running those aerobic and anaerobic tests. And, depending upon how the rest of the test goes, we're looking at, somewhere between 8 to 24 weeks total. Next slide, Hadley.
Oh, there's a question.
Oh,
Go ahead.
all right.
Thanks, Colin. And just taking a quick look at this baseline or initial data set, I noted that W5B is sort of a slightly different, like what if I took a quick look, I would say like it's a difference in sort of anaerobic, aerobic kind of conditions. It also, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, the one that's closest to the site. I'm just wondering if you're kind of exploring that kind, and I should probably wait till you finish, but that kind of difference, like looking at comparative areas of the aquifer.
Yeah, and so that's when we get into the slides talking about the aquifer and looking at the specific chlorobenzene and NDMA concentrations, focusing on that, looking at these parameters. So focusing on the field DO, for looking at general conditions, for something to be aerobic across an aquifer, you're looking at 2 milligrams per liter or more of oxygen. So a natural environment that doesn't have any naturally occurring organic material, there's nothing for any of the bugs to consume, the microorganisms, you're going to be 7 to 9 milligrams per liter. So this 1.2, 1.45, there's and we knew that there's material in the aquifer that's the microbes are consuming the oxygen to degrade. The BOD, that's a number that's often used in wastewater, municipal wastewater. It's a representation of easily degradable biological material. This water's clean from a potable water source, and that's why you guys have it as a municipal aquifer. The COD is the number that it's a heated chemical oxidation, so it's an aggressive oxidation, but it gives you an idea of chemicals that are in the environment that just don't show up in the biological oxygen demand. That biological oxygen demand, it's not the same test we're doing in the microcosms. It's less site specific focused, but the COD does show that you have some influence there, and the fact that you have slightly more COD in that than MW5B, that doesn't, it's not a surprise that you see some changes in the data, but overall, the water is relatively very similar for the focus that we're looking at. There's not a lot of chemistry difference from the levels that we're focusing on.
It was just that I know that we have these areas of greater concentrations, and to me that sort of suggests that there's different. It's not just a matter of how efficient have you been and extracting.
When we get the next couple slides, we do have a couple where we do want to point out, we did do the sampling in some wells when it was pumping and we took sampling when it wasn't pumping, and there are concentration differences there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I do, and that's with the environment. Now, this is a very, it's a high permeable environment. That's why there's so much water being pumped. But when you look at it from a growth scale, it's a very permeable aquifer. But when you get down into the individual details, smaller, thinner lenses, there's going to be some variability in the permeability. So you'll see that's one of the reasons why we wanted to turn the system off, so you can allow things to go back to a steady state. We'll talk more about that. And the observation that we're going to present in the next couple of slides doesn't surprise us, but I can explain more when we get there.
Great, thanks.
Okay, next slide.
So we have our first week data back, and this is chlorobenzene in the aerobic degradation. Chlorobenzene is an easier target. It's commonly aerobically degraded, so it's not a surprise. This was an expectation. If it's a pretty base, it's our different tests that we're running, and the control is the one all the way on the right that it kills the microorganisms. But as you can see, the others, you're seeing chlorobenzene being removed. It's not a surprise. It's not a hard target. It is something that will naturally attenuate on itself relatively easily. Next slide, if there's no questions. Anaerobically, at least in the first week, we're not seeing it degrading. We haven't got the data yet back for the fourth week, but it's not on chlorobenzene. It can't. It's documented. There's aerobic pathways which are faster, but there are also anaerobic degradation pathways too. So we'll see what our later data when it becomes available and see how it looks. We're not presenting the NDMA data because we didn't see any change in the first week, and our fourth week data hasn't come in yet. So that's kind of the data that we have. I guess the other thing on the schedule, so we should be getting the NDMA data in any day now. But based on that data, then we have the 8-week sample. We want to, our plan was to do this for at least 8 weeks and see what the data looks like. Depending upon if we're seeing degradation of the NDMA, we'll share the data, we'll discuss, but we may need to run this test, for 12 to 24 weeks, depending upon, what we're seeing. So just want everybody to understand this bench test may need to run into the middle of 2026.
All right, any questions?
Sebastian?
I've only got questions. Thanks, Colin, for this. From my non-specialist background, you're telling me that the anaerobic, the aerobic microorganisms are able to cause a decrease in chlorobenzene with time. And the opposite is true for the anaerobic microorganisms. Or maybe not the opposite, but they're not as effective at breaking down the chlorobenzene. So the natural conclusion might be, if we did have more aerobic conditions for those microorganisms, could they be able to accomplish the goal quicker than if we just allowed anaerobic and aerobic conditions to exist simultaneously?
Yeah, and so in general, when you're looking at the energy that microorganisms obtain from their reactions, when they're using oxygen as an electron acceptor, electron donor, they get more energy for their individual reaction. So when you look at all the other types of electron acceptors and electron donors, nitrates, sulfate, you go all the way down to hydrogen, each time they go further down in the anaerobic, there's less energy. And so the microorganisms, they don't grow as fast, So it's aerobic reactions are going to be faster. Now, there are bugs that function better, like chlorinated solvents. We don't have that on the site, but chlorinated solvents don't work really well aerobically. They need to have no oxygen present. But there is an organism that naturally occurs that can get rid of chlorobenzene. So the NDMA, the aerobic and the anaerobic bugs that can be naturally occurring, their reaction rates aren't that much different. NDMA is it's just a harder food source. It's more difficult for the enzymes to break. That's why it hangs around the environment as long as it does. It's just not as easily for the enzymes that the microbes produce to break that chemical down. So sometimes an anaerobic reaction is going to be more favorable for the compounds that are a little bit more challenging. We'll see how the bench data shows up. Currently, the aquifer is mostly anaerobic. It has less than 2 milligrams per liter of oxygen. So, the data, there's not a lot of nutrients in this, so when you're looking at bugs, you got to have carbon, food, and then you got to have nutrients, which this water is, clean. There's not a lot of nutrients. And that's one of the things we're adding in these studies is adding some nutrients. And then you have the electron acceptors and donors. So it's this bench test will let us know what conditions, these two different chemicals can degrade most rapidly. And then from those conditions, we will evaluate what's going to be a better path to consider for this aquifer.
I don't want to preempt this, but because you're going to do the studies here, but superficially, it seems to me that if we did in situ oxidation, we'd probably have a reasonably good run of the bugs increasing and thereby decreasing the amount of chlorobenzene that we have at that site. Is that a fair statement?
Well, just want to make sure when we're talking are you talking about oxygenating the environment? Because oxidation, there's also in situ chemical oxidation where you put like peroxide or sulfate. You're talking about just adding oxygen.
The pilot test. He's talking about the pilot test that was done with ORC.
Yeah, the ORC, there's more cost effective. If the aerobic test show comes out and shows that it's a favorable path and we can go down that pathway, we'll have to evaluate options. ORC is probably not going to be the selective solution. We could be just looking at blowing air into the ground. But you could also look at taking advantage of the pumping system. And one of the things we talked about is, focused pumping and controlling, because you can, once you pull the water out, you can oxygenate it and put it back into the ground too. So there's a bunch of different mechanisms. ORC is one of them, and we will evaluate that, but there's a bunch of different mechanisms to get oxygen into the environment.
Yep. And still the focus is NDMA too.
That's the for this aquifer to get restored, NDMA is the keystone. So this from I'm confident that, let's say that anaerobic comes out that the MDMA is better. That's going to be you're going to want to get rid of the NDMA anaerobically, because it's the challenging chemical, because chlorobenzene's not a difficult target. So get rid of the NDMA. That's the one you want to focus on. And then if I suspect chlorobenzene is going to disappear even when you're doing anaerobic. I think we're going to see, as that study runs along, you're going to see chlorobenzene is also going to degrade to anaerobically. But when we're doing in situ biological, you focus on the more challenging chemical first, because the chlorobenzene is an easier target. So our approach is more likely going to be focusing on the NDA first, get that down. I suspect chlorobenzene is going to take care of itself while we're doing that. But if it doesn't, then we'll switch over to an aerobic and polish off the chlorobenzene.
Sure. All right. The municipal aquifer trial update.
Yeah, so this was, one of the things that, all of the team that's involved in remediation for pumping systems that have run for some time, you get steady state conditions with water flowing through the environment, and it's beneficial to turn them off and let things go to a pseudo steady state. Instead of having things flowing through channels that are not naturally occurring because we're controlling the groundwater, we're containing the groundwater, you let things go to steady state. And as Lou mentioned earlier, that the one location where they pumped at a pulsing rate, you can actually end up helping to recover more mass by changing how you target the aquifer. So, we went through this test to see what the steady state conditions can look like. You've all had a chance to read through. This was just, recapping what we want. So would the person, Hadley, if you're controlling it, would you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
And so these two, so the concentration boxes they're exactly the same on each side. So the different pictures are being shown to show what the groundwater contours look like. So, the left side is when it's pumping, and so you can see the capture zone, and the right side is when it's off. From a groundwater elevation with it pumping and pumping, non-pumping, there's no surprise here. There's not much of a change. Hadley, I don't know on the screen you guys are looking at if the analytical boxes are can you all see those numbers?
No.
There's a way for you to zoom in. If you go down to the bottom left-hand corner, there should be like you see the magnifying glass right there. Can you click on that and slide up over one of the boxes? Yeah, and just click on that. That should zoom in. Perfect. So So we have the date. So you got the pumping and the not pumping. You have the water level. Then you have the NDMA concentration and the chlorobenzene. So for the upper aquifer, looking at the NDA numbers, they're a little higher when it's pumping compared to when it's turned off. Now, we have not had the team's not evaluated this in any painstaking detail. So these are just high level observations. But when you're pumping and you've got higher mass in the location and turn off the pump, the idea is, hey, you're pulling mass from somewhere else. That's one idea. But it's part of the pumping. The difference between pumping and non-pumping on the numbers that we're looking at here in the upper aquifer, for me, they're not a big difference in those numbers. I don't now for OW 119.27, the one on the bottom, the chlorobenzene went from 68 to 1. That's a little bit of a change, but even it's not a huge number. So for the upper aquifer, this didn't necessarily provide me any data that says, oh, I want to go look at this and go evaluate things further and think we could change how we're operating the system, help the upper aquifer from a pumping perspective. Hadley, would you hit escape? Any questions on the upper aquifer?
Eric?
Yeah, I'm curious whether you have an opinion on a difference between the amount of time necessary to reestablish the steady state or the non-pumping conditions from a water level perspective could be very different than the mass achieving a true new equilibrium. And I'm wondering if you have any comment on that. Like, would you expect these, if the non-pumping condition extended further, would you expect more deviation in the future, continuing on in this line? Just trying to get your understanding of the difference between the flow and the mass that these are.
Yeah. So, yep. So you're absolutely correct. I agree with the comment about the water response is going to be, particularly with this aquifer and how permeable it is, the water response is going to be pretty quickly. The chemicals, they partition onto soils, they are partitioned onto organic material, they diffuse into lower permeable zones. So you are correct that it takes a little bit of more time to go to a pseudo steady state. Very high level chemicals that are more soluble get back to a steady state a lot faster than chemicals that are not very soluble. Both of these chemicals are relatively soluble. So I think the 2-month difference, about 2 months difference that we have is a pretty good window. Most of the time, so I've done studies over the years that have looked at, keeping things, something that's been running for years, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, month, 2 months, 3 months. Most conditions, you're seeing steady state in 2 to 3 weeks. There are some unique sites, there are some unique chemistries, but 2 to 3 weeks is a pretty good window. I don't think how you're seeing it trending down in this particular group. I don't think you're going to see a change for the upper aquifer.
Okay, all right, thanks, Greg.
Alex, can you unzoom?
Yeah, just hit the escape button. You could probably just go to the next slide too. It probably would do that for you. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide. So now the deeper aquifers, that's the target.
What? Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So you're, the contours you're seeing greater, with the pumping, you're seeing, a greater decrease, in the capture is obviously more important. But the same thing when we turned it off, it came back to a state that is expecting. So the pumping and non-pumping conditions, not a surprise there, but we didn't expect any surprise. It's the data that we were looking at. So can you zoom back in again on that?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, they're both, the data boxes are the same. We just wanted to put them on the same slide. So if we start with the top one, that's 44D. All right. So, the water came up, not a surprise, turned off the pumps, but NDMA went up an order of magnitude. Chlorobenzene went up tours. That drew my attention. That drew the team's attention. So this, we don't know yet. We haven't evaluated the data, but this is one of the reasons why we do these tests, because this is a result that says, oh, let's go look at this location. Let's go see what's going on around there. Is there something in the historical data that we can look at that identifies why things are potentially there? The one thing to think about with this high aquifer that, I mentioned about the when you're looking at the depositional environment, the gross aquifer is very permeable. But inside, you're going to have different layers. If you ever seen like how a beach gets deposited, it's the same thing that happens beneath the surface in all these sites. Over the hundreds of years that everything gets deposited. So with us pumping, we could be pulling so much cleaner water that doesn't have a higher concentration, and you could have a zone of a little bit higher concentration. That's it doesn't have to be a big impact, but when you turn off the pumping, everything gets back to steady state. Things can move around. And so you can see an area. So it helps you focus where you might want to try to target your future activities. One of the things we talked about, in addition to doing the bench test and maybe coming up with a biological remedy, we talked about potentially doing focus pumping. And this goes back to one of the ways that you focus pumping is what Lou talked about earlier, going into a location and pulsing. I like to use the analogy of like washing your clothes. You got dirty clothes, you throw it in your washing machine. If you don't turn it on, it's not that effective at removing the material off your clothing. So it's agitation. So when you're thinking about this material that's in the aquifer, we've been pumping, we've been agitating in a specific manner for some time, and it's been great at recovering mass, and it's done a phenomenal job on containment. But now we need to start thinking about, can we agitate the subsurface to help us get a little bit more mass out? So Lou talked about pulsing. Pulsing is one thing. Pumping a little harder from a well, a little less from another well. Maybe focusing on where the pump is sitting inside a screen. So how, we all need to get together and evaluate this data more. But this gives us some evidence that there are potential opportunities for us to help improve how we're recovering mass. The one thing that this system, when it was installed, the primary objective was containment, with mass recovery as being a secondary function. But now that we've removed a lot of mass, I think we need to start looking at, hey, can we look at focusing on smaller, not the whole area, but start focusing on some smaller zones and do some focused pumping that we might be able to recover more mass with less pumping. So back to your concern about, hey, do we have to be pumping 1 million gallons per day? Maybe not. We might be able to focus in on zones where the higher concentrations are, pump at a lower flow rate, higher concentration. You get the same amount of mass out as if you have a higher pumping rate and a lower concentration. So this goes back to these discussions we've had, these ideas that we have about focus pumping is one of the options that we definitely are thinking about with the alternatives, in addition to the in situ biological enhancements. So the other wells have some similar, not the 175-37. I didn't, there's really nothing in that location, but the others had some slight changes. Again, they've changed a little bit. We're going to look at the data a little bit further, but 44D was the one that caught our attention primarily.
All right, any questions? Okay. So next step, that's all for Cullen. If you have anything for him, but he'll stay on. So for next step for planned work for 2026, I think it's maybe not the next meeting. We set the general agenda. It might be 2 meetings from now. We plan to have Joe Ricker give the update on the 2025 data from his presentation. We plan to finish the bench scale testing. And then what Cullen was really focusing in on, that one well area. Should we go in there and do a data gap evaluation? I know Jason has brought this up too. Should we really be looking at the soil concentrations and the lithology a little bit better and understanding how much mass is in that area? Where does it sit? Where would we want to focus pumping from it at depth? Are there any specific zones that we're seeing in the geology that we also want to focus on? So we might be planning a field investigation for next year, but as Colin said, we're all sitting and chewing on that data a little bit more before we present anything. So it would still need to have approval, be a work plan, then we send to the ministry to get their acceptance of it, and then to start that work, and also access agreements, because again, this is offsite, to make sure we can, and that's what I've started, right? I'd have Jesse looking at, where would you where would you put holes? So we can start the access agreements if we need them, because that's a long lead time item. So those are some of the ideas that we have for next year. And also all of this looking towards is a next step from later in 2026, 2027 timeframe, a field pilot study. Work plan in process. Sebastian?
Okay, could I just ask, do we have antecedents about NDMA and how NDMA can be broken down? Have we got concrete illustrations anywhere in the States or in Canada
Sure.
with large concentrations of NDMA, which could be actually broken down? And what method did they use?
I'll
to do
let
that?
Cullen answer, but
Okay.
the big plumes, because I jumped on that too when I first got here, because I haven't had another NDMA site. They're not that prevalent.
Yeah,
And guess what it is? UV.
is it really?
Yeah. But
Okay.
Colin, I don't know if you have any, I mean, they are military doing testing with propane that we've all discussed too. But you don't want to see propane tanks out through the community. That's not okay.
Pumping propane in the soil isn't one of our better moves.
Exactly, so I'll let Cullen answer it, but that's
Yeah.
what my research found.
So one of the things that the University of Minnesota has a publicly available database that shows documented degradation pathways for NDMA. And there are multiple different type of microbiological, different enzymes that different microbes can produce that are capable of degrading NDMA and the daughter products down to its mineralization, get down to carbon and hydrogen, in this case in nitrogen. But so that's one of the reasons why we are looking at these biological tests, because there are documentations that NDMA can go through a biological pathway. Again, it's not an easy target. It's not it's a unique compound. It's not everywhere. There's not a lot of studies done on it, but there's definitely work that has proven that it can be degraded biologically at specific sites and specific locations. So that's why we're doing the bench test. I will say that the water, again, I'm going to reiterate it. For a microbiological and in situ biological remedy to work, you have to have sufficient carbon, you have to have sufficient nitrogen, and sufficient phosphate. The rest of the micronutrients, they're typically present in the environment. The nitrate in the groundwater is nowhere near the concentration that's needed. And that's one of the things that GHD and they're doing, they're matching a carbon to nitrogen to phosphate, a molar ratio that promotes, allows the microbes to grow. So the NDMA does have a pathway.
No,
It is.
yeah, it's a.
Questions?
Yep, no, good question, thank you. All right, then I think this is my last slide, just 2026 planned reporting. A lot of it will look very familiar with our annual reports, our audit report, the Canagajig data summary, ongoing progress reports. And then we will do a conditions report for both the municipal aquifer study and the bench scale when we get those finished. And we will continue to march forward on our efforts on the creek risk assessment. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Just in relation to the last
One
point.
more. I had one more. That's good. I think, is this what, go ahead.
Oh, it's not what I was looking at, unfortunately. The HERA update. You haven't really spoken to that. That was just your comment about you still looking at the risk assessment?
Yes, absolutely. So we're getting the ministry, the data summary report. We'll get it to everybody in track 2. So it's really just looking at the data and understanding it better, and that I talked about a full complete database. So the ministry can their staff can look at it and play with the data and do all of the statistical type of analysis that risk assessors love to do. And then I think we'll have a better direction and trajectory on finishing the risk assessment. And I think we also talked about breaking it into two different ones, because there's different goals for both human health and eco, and it just seems to maybe be a kind of neater path if we have two reports.
Just a follow-up on an action item from the last meeting. Have you received all the different historical reports? Do you have any gaps?
Susan was very helpful and provided some, so thank you for that. And GHD has gotten some, and the ministry is also providing some. So I think we've gotten to where we feel comfortable that we've looked under enough rocks and we're not gonna keep going. We have the majority of what we need. I think we have more than. So Susan has a question.
Susan.
Yes, I did find a number of the reports in the app files, and it reported that I had them, but nobody's taken them or done anything with them. So maybe
We'll
you
follow up.
decided you don't need them, or
There were two from your list that we wanted, so that we don't have. So I will make another note. I
that
think
was on the second list. There were, I think, 10 in the first bunch that I sent you.
okay, I'm sorry, I'll circle back with you, and we might have somebody pick them up, and I'm
Yeah.
looking at Lou.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, Susan.
thank you, I'm sorry, I thought we had gotten there, okay. So, Tiffany, Nathan, Alex, and we had a nice discussion last month, this month, I can't remember, about kind of what's going on for next steps with the track. And we know that the ministry also wants to have some open house or public communication plans as we move towards the 2028 consent order. So we talked about what would be some of those next steps. And the timeline, we're working on that timeline overall to understand where all the pieces fit together and when there would be good points for public communication. But the first step we planned was a survey. And I think probably a lot of you read the article that was in the paper that Pender wrote, that was well done. That might actually help, right? It was good timing because maybe more people that wouldn't be paying attention were paying attention. So we plan to send out a survey probably early next year with just not about the site so much, but just about, do you know that this condition is happening under Elmira, that we have this historic legacy aquifer cleanup? If you know about it, do you care about it? Do you want to have future discussion about it? If you want to have future discussion, how do you want it to be? What type of format? Is it open house? Is it electronic? Is it emails? Is it a newsletter? And to just get people's thoughts so we can kind of aggregate that and move in the direction that works for folks.
So I guess as an action item for the committee, to take back, and Alex, sorry for jumping all over the place, you're tracking us, right? I'll just make a request for all members to bring any ideas that you may have for survey questions forward. We'll have a bit of a discussion at our next meeting to try to help Lanxess get the ball rolling there, okay?
Yeah. So it's a bit of a communication sort of style survey. Yeah. All right, now I really think that was it. Okay, anything else? Any questions? Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Hadley. All right, so that brings us to item 6. As Hadley mentioned, we did meet. I know it was before the snow. That's all I remember. But yeah, we have come up with a tentative schedule, and agenda that we wanted to review with the committee just to make sure that it resonates with everybody and it's meeting the needs. You can see there, our next schedule meeting will be for February 19th, as long as that works with everybody's schedules, of course. So we can look at this as our last item, but just kind of a heads up, that's what we're looking for. Then we're going to have our second meeting in and around April. I should probably speak to what we're talking about at each meeting too, right? So the consultation plan, as Hadley just mentioned, the intention is to go ahead with the survey. If we can bring forward some of those questions, would be helpful at that next meeting. I think it'll make for a good discussion. We'll have another annual update, what's coming up. The next meeting after that, as you'd mentioned, Joe Rickard's going to come in and give us an update on the AMR. We'll have an opportunity to review, if we have it at that point, any public consultation that would have come forward from the survey. And we can review the draft presentation to council at the April 16th meeting as well. Because you can see there, May 12th will be that first annual, biannual, I don't even know what it is, twice a year presentation to council. Again, with the AMR just being presented to track, we felt it's just makes sense that we have that presentation for council as well. This is where it kind of, some of the informal estimated timelines, I don't think that we would have anything firmed up by that point to be able to move forward. That brings us to track 3, track 4, June 18th will be 3. More talk about the risk assessment at that point. And then track 4 in September, we'll get some update on field work. We'll have an opportunity to review what our second presentation to council would be like as well. Now, we'll see whether or not we need one of these meetings in there, whether it be 3, 4, or 5. We have to condense, we will, as long as we hit our 4 meetings a year. Like always, I'm not going to ask people to come if we don't have enough to speak about, so we'll make sure that we have full agendas for these meetings. And that brings us to track 5, which would just be a similar type meeting as we're having here. We would have Lanxess's work plan and potentially some other things to add to the agenda as things arise. So happy for any feedback that the committee may have, questions, concerns, observations, or general nuisances. Try to avoid the nuisances.
I noticed that there was sort of a hiatus between our September meeting and then the end of the year. I'm wondering if a meeting could be considered with the topic of a new control order.
Sure. I think
That we get the ball rolling, and from our perspective, from the council or the committee's perspective on what needs to be in a future control order.
I like the idea. I'm wondering if we want to have a subcommittee broken out to have more fulsome discussions on that, more so than we would be able to accomplish in a 1 or 2 hour meeting.
Okay.
I'm open to anything, in your hands.
I just think we do have a lot of expertise here from a variety of perspectives. And it might not be a bad thing to get that at a meeting like that. This would be the end of 2026, so we still got 2 years before our new controller technically has to be put in place. But I think it would be good if we got some sort of general discussion as to what we think we would like to have in the control order.
Thinking around late October, I imagine.
Before Christmas.
Reminder elections.
Oh, that's right.
I think that's why
That
we
was
had
great.
that hiatus. We would be in lame duck, and so didn't
I mean,
really.
it doesn't affect.
The committee will still operate for sure, so we can still have that meeting, to your point, because regardless of who's in this role the next round, those discussions will have to be had, so.
And it would be a good starting point for a future committee if that's the way it goes.
Any concerns with that approach? Yeah.
I don't have a concern per se. I did want to point out that there are a number of very important technical reports coming in 2026, in accordance with what was just updated. We have an event scale study report, an offsite municipal aquifer steady state conditions report, preliminary groundwater remedial technology evaluation report, containment assessment report. So those are very important documents that are really going to perform some of the technical components for a future control order. So we don't necessarily want to get too far ahead of those and thinking about what a control order would be without having some understanding of what some of the technical building blocks are going to be that are going to need to be part of it. So monitoring, reporting, annual, semi-annual monitoring, what technologies, what's going where, what level of control, what instruments of the ministry are used to manage it, what C of A's might be issues. So it's an evolving thing. I'm not saying we can't get started on, but I think we have to keep in mind where we are with some key technical documents coming forward. We don't want to get too far ahead of thinking about what we want without knowing what the technical blocks are.
It's a fair point. Thank you.
I would just sort of counter that in the sense that there, there are only gonna be another 2 years maximum until a new control order technically has to be undertaken. And we know that the ministry will be looking intensively at a potential control order, which will probably have to go through various departments, and that just will eat up a lot of time. So I'm just wondering if we can't, get this ball rolling a little bit quicker, to let people know, the ministry in particular, what might be some of our expectations and whether they could be factored in. That'd be my gut feeling, because if we get into the technicalities, I think it's gonna take a long time to actually work through those in the detail that might be required. And some of us probably don't have the expertise to be able to do that with, in good conscience, to be honest. I wouldn't, I don't have the technical expertise on some of this material. But I think, have an overview of what we might consider and then sort of a general objectives in a control order, in a future control order.
Go to Eric on this side.
I think I saw Jason on the screen. I'm curious what the province's timeline, when they're gonna start work on this and when they want input from this committee.
I think I'm in alignment with Eric's comments. Like he hit the nail on the head in terms of these building blocks. These technical reports and next steps that come out of these, and the discussions that come out of review and evaluation of these documents, is ultimately going to trigger what will be proposed by Lanxess in terms of is it status quo, or is it going to be a revised risk-based approach? And then the ministry is going to be looking at those options to consider. So while Sebastian's thought has merit as well, I mean, high level concepts can be discussed amongst the committee. Getting into the details, not so much until we work through these technical aspects. I just want to make one note though, the control order doesn't expire. It has a so-called quote unquote a deadline goal of achieving the described cleanup through the orders, but it's not an expiry date. So it's not that the control order stops; it'll be there, whether we land on a new control order by that time or not.
We'll work under the old one, is what you're saying, in
Correct.
other, until all of the reviews and the comments are through. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Jason. Brad?
Is there a copy of the existing control order? Okay, thank you.
Just to try to help me understand some of Sebastian's objectives. You said there's things that you can imagine you would like to have part of a control order. Could you give us an example of something that would be a high level objective that you're thinking would be a good point for discussion, or
Why don't we start with the timeline, Eric? Can we envision realistically a timeline when we can have a objective realized? Or do we just leave it up in the air and just say, okay, whatever comes, comes? Well, that could be tomorrow, it could be 100 years from now. I think it's incumbent upon us to at least provide some guidance as to whether, it's more like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And if we can think in those terms, at least to give us some idea as to a timeline. And then we might get into questions about what exactly are our goals here. It's not just a timeline, but exactly what does remediation actually look like? Okay, what do we say? We've cleaned up the aquifer. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that we have absolutely zero contaminants everywhere? I'd say that's probably unrealistic. Okay, and if that's not realistic, then what is? And again, I think committee here with some technical guidance from people who know these things, Tiffany, Eric, can help us determine what those parameters might actually be. And again, another question might be, do we have to have the same objectives throughout the entire aquifer? Or can we say certain parts are a little bit more critical to us than others? And again, I think that's sort of a high level discussion that can be made, and I don't think there's an obvious answer to anybody. On that. And if we do have, parts of the aquifer which are less quality, than others. Who's impacted by that, and can we sell that to those parties? And these are some of the questions that I think are incumbent upon us as representatives of the greater public to address. And they need to be part of the control order, I think. There's some of them.
That's fair. I think there's a lot of inputs that need to be incorporated into the control order, including what you're suggesting. I think that we tried to be deliberate with the first two meetings to really start that public consult. I thought that it would be to the committee's advantage to, seek what the community wants. Let's listen to that feedback. Let's let that guide some of our conversations. Hopefully we'd be able to get some of that feedback at that second track meeting to discuss even further. And potentially that could help us have more of a discussion if we are getting some of those other inputs. Eric did a great job listing all of those reports that aren't included in this agenda, but that might be something that we can look to include so we know when they'll be received and when we can expect to talk about it. I have concerns about the meeting during lame duck just because of the election. That's not to say that we can't have a meeting and discuss that. Again, I think we were intentional to have that gap there because of that. And so unless I think we have consensus around the committee that it's a necessary meeting, I'm more inclined to just keep it as is at this point, knowing that with the 5 meetings, we can still actually remove one. And so we may actually have a longer gap, which is not what we wanted either. And that's why we went forward with 5. Certainly note your concern, and certainly I hope a conversation that we continue to have at every meeting. And whether we designate a single meeting to it in the future, I think it would be well worth it. Are we there this year? I'm not quite sure, just with some of the dynamics that are going on. That's my perspective, but I'm one person, so. Any others?
Will you remain on committee if you don't get elected back into council?
No. No, and I mean, there will be a new process for this committee, right? You would put expressions in. I'm not going to speculate at what the future holds, so let's see what November brings. Okay, so we'll leave it as is for now, Sebastian. I am going to make note of that though. We'll circle back at some point, okay? Any other questions or concerns? All right, moving right along then to our update to council, which is tentatively scheduled for May the 26th. As you can see there, we have an update on the AMR. Hopefully we can engage with council around some of those survey results that we get, in consultation with Lanxess. We'll get the formal results obviously later in the year, early in 2027. But, if we can have some of those conversations, that would be useful. But I wanted to open it up to anybody for feedback. If you think that there's something in there that maybe is not quite the right time for the council presentation, or if there's something that's not there that you think probably should be in there. And again, this is something that, I'll work with Tiffany on as we continue to progress throughout the year, and we can check in with the committee at both of our meetings. So if we do have some messaging, we'll be sure to circulate it in advance. Okay. All right, so that brings us to item 8. We spoke about this pretty extensively, so I'm not going to rehash it. Unless there's any other questions. I think Hadley did well to speak to it. Other business, so there have been a couple of items. I'm gonna get 9.1. I'm gonna throw it over to you, Tiffany.
Sure, I brought this to Chair Joe's attention, just to have it as an item, an FYI item. There's been several teams meetings with the ministry, for the risk management officials across the province about the proposal to change the boundaries of the conservation authorities in a sort of a regionalization of them. And I had inquired if that would affect sort of the day-to-day operation of GRCA and their involvement on this committee. And from their response, they are not anticipating any difference to their day-to-day operations. The one comment I would say, it aligns with source water protection regions and the legislative requirements under that. So that's basically just an update. There's been an enormous number of these changes and they've been coming through fast and furious. So that's kind of just the update.
Perfect.
Just to keep an eye on it.
Thanks, Tiffany. Any questions? No. All right, couple pieces of media, just briefly. As Hadley mentioned, Terry Pender did write a pretty reasonable, balanced piece. It's worth a read if you haven't had a chance to read it. It was in a November 13th edition of the Record. Just want to say thanks to Mr. Pender for taking an interest and keeping this on the radar. Hopefully we can continue to work with Mr. Pender and the Record to keep this on not just the region's radar, but the townships as well. 9.3, we've spoken to this already a couple of times. There has been news from the region of Waterloo about water capacity. I was hoping that we could get a little bit more information from the region, but they're probably dealing with the water capacity issue right now, so they couldn't be here. So we'll follow back with them. Sorry, I shouldn't be facetious. You wouldn't have any updates, would you, Sandy?
You know, we're still trying to get more information. I don't really have a lot more than what was put out in the media.
Yeah. And I don't know that regional staff really do at this point either.
If they do, we're not getting anything more than what's in the media.
Cards close to the chest. Fair enough. Yep.
Is this something that could be put on upcoming agendas so that we do get, I guess, regular updates? Because I think it could affect Sebastian's point, what our goals and timelines need to be potentially.
Yeah. Alex, can you make note of that next meeting?
Yeah, and along that line, I mean, if we're throwing 1 million gallons a day of clean water into the creek.
Should we, yeah.
Use the pipeline to go back to.
Anybody give me perspective, 1 million gallons a day, how many houses or homes would that supply?
That's a good question.
It's a small town.
It would be a lot. It would be a Myra plus, I
Yeah.
think. But I do want to say that we don't treat to drinking water standards.
Well, that's just because we don't chlorinate it.
Right, we don't disinfect.
But the point is, when we do our evaluations report, I think it's only responsible of Lanxess to include, we could do treatment at the region, right? They could, if we stopped cleaning up the plume, we could put the efforts for treatment at where the region is pulling it for people's drinking water. They do this in other cities, because I think it's all about sustainability, cost balance. It's about what's the best usage of resources, because it takes a lot of energy and we're just putting it back into the creek. So these are all things to really consider, and that's an option. And I know the region has said they've never knowingly pulled from an impacted plume, and I understand that, but it doesn't mean it can't be done, and it can't be safe to drink either.
UV disinfection is a common final water treatment process for drinking water systems. So, it would align quite well with this contaminant.
And
I'm
it's
not
a
suggesting,
sustainable
I'm not suggesting that
solution too.
they are the water provider.
Right,
It's their
yes.
fault.
But I think it's an option that I think needs to be, that you all as the community and the folks living here need to look at and say, is that something we would want to entertain or not? And so we will carry it forward in our remedial alternatives evaluation to understand, because in all of those, it's not just about cost or about feasibility, there's different things that we use to rate them, right? Cost, feasibility, timeline, greenhouse gas emissions, sustainability, energy use. So all of those are factors that go in, and that's one that is a greener option because we're not dumping, all that treated water.
It's more than one factor, though. You mentioned 4 or 5 of them.
Yes.
There's also perception,
Yes, yeah, sure.
and we have to be very conscious of that based on history.
Some, not, you're right, absolutely. And I don't want to seem apathetic to that either. And it's just the balance. Mhm. Other towns do, and I don't know if this happens, it probably does, but sometimes they just mix an impacted aquifer with non-impacted, and that's how they get below the detection limit. Right? So these things happen.
They happen in lots of places. The other thing we've sort of tossed around is, are there industrial uses? I mean, that is
Right.
the industrial side of town. Are there industrial uses that, would require piping and some other things, but, is that an option?
You're right. And I know Rob, with the plant manager brought to my attention, there was a recent one about, like heat from it. Do you use heat?
We don't, but there's some people in town that are sort of exploring that.
Right, and I feel like we need to decide what the alternative is, because it could also change the amount. It might not be 1 million gallons a day after 2028 either. So that's where I told him, I think we should consider it, but I think we need to know what the new control order is, so people aren't, because the target could change and it may not work for economics. Yeah.
Anything else on that? All right, that's item 10 is our next one, so we'll start with 10.1. This is the monthly progress report. Tiffany, did you have anything to add to this?
No, just, it was, just the fact that you had another shutdown. That provided sort of non-humping conditions for you twice a year monitoring the water levels. So that was just, the main.
So that was,
It was.
An
We
actual-
did a quick October shutdown of
Yeah.
pumping to get some more water level data to help bolster our information.
perfect, thank you. So I will note that there was some correspondence. I just want to take a moment. There was some correspondence recently sent to the township that wasn't accepted as official track correspondence. The township does have a process in place to review all correspondence that's submitted and ensure that it aligns with the township's respectful behavior policy, and it contains respectful language and commentary. So when correspondence is received that isn't aligned with the policy, the clerk will give the requester the opportunity to revise their comments if they wish to, and once it's aligned with the policy, it will be received as official track correspondence. So I had mentioned item 11, our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for February 19th, 2026. Making sure that works with everybody's schedules.
I've already marked it in.
Awesome, thanks, Brian.
Nathan, did I just ask the question here about the correspondence here? Did I understand this correctly, that we received some correspondence from Lanxess which was not accepted because of wording, or?
Gosh, no, it was a resident.
Oh,
It's correspondence from a resident.
got that, okay, got it.
Thanks for clarifying.
And what did you do? No, exactly, Heather, come on, pass up, pass up. Yeah.
So February 19th is the week of Family Day. Just throwing that out there. I know it shouldn't matter for me, but the 16th is Family Day. The 19th is when we're scheduled to meet on a Thursday. 6 o'clock. Yeah. Perfect. Excellent. All right, so I need a motion for adjournment then. Okay. Not all at once. Come on, Sebastian. All those in favor? That's scary. Thanks, everyone.